The billionaire's twins couldn't walk until he saw his black maid do this. He couldn't believe it. Part 1. The struggle behind closed doors. Alexander Reynolds, tech mogul and billionaire, had everything money could buy except what he needed most. A solution for his 18-month-old twins, Emma and Ethan, who were still unable to walk. Despite consultations with world-renowned specialists and experimental treatments costing millions, the twins showed little improvement. Their developmental delays became Alexander's best-kept secret, as he maintained a perfect public image while privately drowning in worry and frustration. When his wife left him, overwhelmed by the stress and his obsessive work schedule, Alexander found himself a single father, relying heavily on his household staff. Among them was Denise Morgan, a middle-aged woman who had worked as a housekeeper in the Reynolds mansion for only 3 months. Quiet and observant, Denise noticed how the parade of specialists came and went, always with the same grim expressions. Part 2. The Observer. Denise Morgan had raised 3 children of her own and put herself through night school to earn a degree in childhood development while working multiple jobs. Before taking the position at the Reynolds estate, she had worked for 15 years at a rehabilitation center for children with developmental challenges. This experience gave her a unique perspective on the twins' situation, but she kept her observations to herself, knowing her role was to clean, not to advise. As weeks passed, Denise watched the twins' frustration grow during their therapy sessions. She noticed how the specialists focused on complex exercises while overlooking the fundamentals of motor development. During her shifts, when she thought no one was watching, Denise would speak softly to the twins, encouraging them in ways different from their formal therapy. Part 3. The discovery. One afternoon, Alexander returned home early from a business meeting to find Denise in the twins' playroom. Rather than cleaning, she was on the floor with Emma and Ethan, guiding them through a series of simple movements using household items as props. She had created an obstacle course with pillows and toys that encouraged them to pull themselves up and balance. Alexander stood frozen in the doorway, watching as his children, who had shown such limited progress with expensive specialists, were giggling and attempting to stand while holding on to a makeshift support Denise had created. When Emma took 2 unsteady steps toward a toy, Alexander gasped loudly enough for Denise to notice his presence. Flustered and apologetic, Denise quickly stood up, assuming she would be fired for overstepping her boundaries. Instead, Alexander asked her, with a mixture of desperation and hope, "What are you doing with my children?" Part 4. Breaking down barriers. Hesitantly, Denise explained her background and the philosophy she had developed over years of working with children. Development isn't something you can force or schedule. Each child has their own timeline and needs to feel secure and playful to want to explore their capabilities. She showed Alexander how the clinical approach of the specialist had created anxiety in the twins, making them associate standing and walking with stress rather than joy. Her method centered on turning movement into play and creating an environment where the children felt safe to fail. Initially skeptical, Alexander agreed to let Denise incorporate her techniques into the twins' daily routine. As days turned into weeks, he witnessed remarkable progress. The household dynamic shifted as Alexander began to participate in the sessions, learning from Denise's approach and reconnecting with his children in the process. The billionaire, who had prided himself on knowing everything, found himself humbled, learning from someone he had barely noticed before. What started as a professional relationship evolved into mutual respect as class and racial barriers that had invisibly separated them began to dissolve. Part 5. A New Foundation. 6 months later, Emma and Ethan were not only walking but running through the mansion's hallways. Alexander had transformed one wing of his home into a developmental center for children with similar challenges, with Denise as its director. The experience changed Alexander profoundly. He realized how his wealth and privilege had blinded him to the wisdom found in unexpected places. He had always valued credentials and status, overlooking the practical knowledge gained through real-life experience. In a rare television interview about his children's progress and the new center, Alexander was asked about the remarkable turnaround. "I had surrounded myself with experts who saw only the problem," he said, "when what my children needed was someone who saw their potential." Sitting beside him was Denise, now his partner in both the center and in life, a woman whose compassion and wisdom had healed not only his children but Alexander himself. The billionaire who once believed his money could solve any problem discovered that the most valuable things, love, wisdom, and understanding, were the things he couldn't buy, brought into his life by a woman society had taught him to overlook. Grace Wilson arrived at the Chen residence at precisely 7 each morning. The security guard at the private elevator nodded to her as she swiped her access card, already familiar with her routine though she had only been working there for 3 months. "Morning, Grace," he said. "Another busy one up there today. Some doctor from London just arrived." Grace nodded, her expression pleasant but reserved. "Thank you, Thomas. Good to know." As the elevator ascended to the penthouse, Grace mentally prepared herself for the day ahead. At 52, she had spent most of her life taking care of other people's homes and children. This job paid better than most, but the atmosphere in the Chen household was heavier than any place she'd worked before. The elevator doors opened directly into the penthouse foyer. Grace could already hear voices coming from the main living area. The crisp British accent must belong to the London specialist Thomas had mentioned. She slipped quietly through the service entrance to the kitchen, where Maria, the cook, was preparing breakfast. "Good morning," Grace said, hanging her coat on a hook. "Sounds like they started early today." Maria rolled her eyes. "Another miracle worker who charges more per hour than I make in a month. Mr. Chen fired the physical therapist yesterday, said she wasn't aggressive enough with the program." Grace tied her apron around her waist. "That's the 3rd one this month." "And Mrs. Chen left again," Maria added in a hushed tone. "Took a bag yesterday evening. Said something about needing space to think." Grace wasn't surprised. In her 3 months working for the family, Alicia Chen had spent more nights away than at home. The tension between the couple was thick enough to cut with a knife whenever they occupied the same room. "How are the little ones today?" Grace asked, gathering cleaning supplies. "The same. That poor boy tried to reach for his spoon at breakfast and got so frustrated he knocked over his bowl. Mr. Chen just stared at his phone the whole time." Grace sighed. She had worked for wealthy families before, but never one quite like this, so full of resources yet so empty of joy. Before coming to work for the Chens, Grace had spent 15 years at the Rainbow Children's Center, a rehabilitation facility for children with various developmental challenges. She had started there as a custodian, but her natural way with the children caught the attention of the center's director, who encouraged her to take night classes in childhood development. Even while raising her own 3 children as a single mother, Grace had managed to earn her degree. The economic downturn had forced budget cuts at the center, and Grace found herself looking for work. The agency had sent her to the Chens as a housekeeper, and though the job description didn't include childcare, Grace couldn't help but notice the twins and their struggles. She began her morning routine, dusting the endless shelves of awards and business books in Robert Chen's home office. Through the open door, she could see the scene unfolding in the living room. The twins sat on a playmat while the British doctor demonstrated some kind of assessment. Robert stood nearby, arms crossed, his expression tense. "You see, Mr. Chen, the difficulty appears to be not in the physical capability, but in the motivation," the doctor was saying. "The twins have adequate muscle tone and coordination for their age. What's lacking is the initiative to stand and walk." Grace moved quietly into the dining room, wiping down surfaces while keeping an eye on the scene. She noticed how little Noah's face scrunched up when the doctor tried to make him stand. It wasn't defiance or inability she saw in his expression, it was fear. The doctor continued his assessment, making notes on a tablet while talking about proprioceptive feedback and vestibular stimulation. Robert nodded along, occasionally, asking questions about treatment timelines and success rates. Neither man seemed to notice how Lily kept looking toward the window where a bird was perched on the balcony, clearly more interested in that than in the doctor's exercises. When the Doctor left, Robert disappeared into his office for a conference. Ecall and the nanny took the twins to their playroom. Grace continued her cleaning duties, making her way eventually to the playroom to vacuum. "I'm just going to step out for a moment to prepare their lunch," the nanny said when Grace entered. "Can you keep an eye on them?" "Of course," Grace replied. Alone with the twins, Grace hummed softly as she worked. Noah, sitting on the floor surrounded by toys, watched her with curious eyes. "Hello there, little man," she said with a warm smile. "That's a nice tower you're building." Noah babbled something in response, waving a block in her direction. Across the room, Lily was trying to reach a book on a low shelf, grunting with effort, but not crawling toward it. Grace set aside her cleaning cloth and knelt beside Lily. "You want that book, sweetheart?" "It's just over there." "Let's see if we can get it together." Instead of simply handing Lily the book, Grace gently placed her hands on the little girl's sides. "Feel the floor with your hands, honey." "That's right." Lily looked up at her, confused but trusting. Grace continued to speak softly, encouraging rather than instructing. "Your body knows what to do. No hurry, no worry." When the nanny returned, Grace quickly stood up and resumed her cleaning. She had learned early in her employment that the Chens preferred their household staff to be seen and not heard, especially regarding the children's care. Days passed in much the same way. Grace observed the parade of specialists who came and went, each with their own theories and techniques, none seeming to make much difference. She noticed how the twins became increasingly frustrated during these sessions, how they seemed to withdraw further into themselves with each new face and each new regimen. During her lunch breaks, Grace often sat in the staff area, flipping through a worn notebook filled with observations and techniques she had gathered during her years at the rehabilitation center. She had seen children with far more severe challenges than the Chen twins make remarkable progress. But the approach had been completely different. One afternoon, while polishing silver in the kitchen, Grace overheard an argument between Robert and Alicia, who had returned from her latest absence. "I'm taking them to my mother's for the weekend," Alicia was saying. "They need a change of scenery." "They need consistency," Robert countered. "Dr. Yamamoto is flying in from Tokyo on Saturday. His approach has shown promising results with similar cases." "Similar cases?" Alicia's voice rose. "They're not cases, Robert. They're our children. When was the last time you played with them? Really played? Not just supervised some clinical exercise?" Their voices moved further away, but the tension lingered in the air. Grace exchanged glances with Maria, who shook her head sadly. Later that day, Grace was cleaning the mirrors in the main bathroom when she heard a crash followed by crying. She hurried toward the sound and found Noah on the playroom floor wailing. The nanny was on the phone in the corner, frantically trying to end her call. "I just stepped away for a second," the young woman explained. Flustered, he tried to reach for a toy on the table and fell. Grace quickly assessed the situation. Noah was more frightened than hurt, his cries already subsiding as she knelt beside him. "It's okay, buddy. Everyone falls sometimes." The nanny looked relieved. "Thank you, Grace. I need to check on Lily in the other room. Can you stay with him for a moment?" Left alone with Noah again, Grace helped him sit up comfortably. She noticed a colorful ball just out of his reach, the toy he had apparently been trying to get. "You wanted this ball?" she asked, but instead of giving it to him, she placed it slightly away. "Look how it rolls," she said, gently pushing it so it moved a short distance. Noah's eyes followed the ball, his previous tears forgotten. Grace moved it again just a little further. The boy leaned forward, his hand outstretched. "That's it," she encouraged. "You can get it." For the next few minutes, Grace engaged Noah in a simple game, gradually encouraging him to shift his weight, to reach and balance. She didn't force him to stand or crawl. Instead, she created a situation where movement became natural and desirable. What Grace didn't realize was that Robert had returned home early and was standing in the hallway, observing this interaction through the partially open door. He watched as his son, who had shown such resistance to formal therapy, was now eagerly rocking forward on his hands and knees, laughing as Grace rolled the ball just within his reach each time. For the first time in months, Robert saw his son, not as a problem to be solved but as a child at play. And he saw Grace not just as the woman who cleaned his home, but as someone who had unlocked a door he hadn't even known existed. He quietly stepped back from the doorway, his mind racing, with questions. Who was this woman really? And what did she know that all his expensive specialists didn't? Robert couldn't sleep that night. The image of Noah playing with Grace kept replaying in his mind. His son's laughter, the natural way he moved toward the ball, the absence of fear in his eyes. It was such a stark contrast to how the twins responded during their therapy sessions. At 3 a.m, Robert got out of bed and went to his home office. He opened his laptop and pulled up the personnel file on Grace Wilson. The information was sparse. 52 years old, previous employment at Rainbow Children's Center, clean background check, excellent references. Nothing that explained the magic he had witnessed. The next morning, Robert lingered over breakfast, something he rarely did. He watched as the nanny struggled to feed the twins, noting how she immediately picked up toys that fell rather than encouraging the children to reach for them. When Grace arrived and began her morning routine, Robert observed her from the corner of his eye. There was nothing remarkable about her, just a middle-aged woman in a simple uniform, going about her duties quietly and efficiently. Yet there had been something in the way she spoke to Noah, something in her approach that had sparked a connection his expensive specialist had failed to achieve. Robert made a decision. Instead of heading to his office, he called his assistant. "Cancel my meetings today, all of them. Tell them something came up with the twins." His assistant's surprise was evident even over the phone. "Sir, the board meeting can wait," Robert finished firmly. "Family emergency." He waited until the nanny took the twins to their playroom, then followed, staying just out of sight. Through the partially open door, he watched as she set up the day's activities, all part of the structured program designed by the latest specialist. "I'll be right back with your special cups," the nanny said, leaving the room. Robert seized the opportunity. He stepped into the hallway, pretending to check his phone as Grace passed by with a stack of freshly folded towels. "Grace," he said, startling her slightly. "Yes, Mr. Chen?" She stopped, her expression carefully neutral. I need to speak with you about something." He glanced toward the playroom. "About the twins." A flicker of concern crossed her face. "Sir, if this is about yesterday, I apologize for overstepping. I know I'm not supposed to interact with the children, but the nanny asked me to watch Noah for a moment and—" No, Robert interrupted. "That's not it at all. Actually, I saw you yesterday. With Noah." Grace's hands tightened on the towels. "I see." "You were rolling the ball with him," Robert continued. "He was moving toward it, really trying to move. I haven't seen him that engaged in months." Grace relaxed slightly but remained cautious. "He's a bright boy, they both are. What were you doing with him? It wasn't like any therapy I've seen." She hesitated. "Nothing special, Mr. Chen, just playing." "But it wasn't just playing," Robert insisted. "There was something specific about how you were doing it. The way you positioned the ball, how you spoke to him." Grace seemed to consider her words carefully. "With respect, sir, sometimes the special techniques and structured exercises can overwhelm children. They sense the pressure, the expectations. It makes them freeze up." The nanny's voice floated down the hallway as she returned to the playroom, ending their conversation. "We'll talk more later," Robert said quickly. "Please." Throughout the day, Robert found reasons to be near the playroom when Grace was cleaning. He watched how the twins responded to her presence, the way they looked at her, how their bodies seemed to relax when she hummed or spoke softly to them. It was subtle but undeniable. That afternoon, when the physical therapist arrived for the twins session, Robert asked to speak with her privately before she began. "I'd like to try something different today," he said, instead of the usual routine. The therapist, a young woman with impeccable credentials, looked confused. "Mr. Chen, consistency is key with the protocol we've developed. The protocol isn't working," Robert stated flatly. "We've been at this for months with minimal progress." These things take time. I'd like Grace to join the session today, he interrupted. Grace? Your housekeeper? The therapist's confusion deepened. Yes, as an observer. The therapist clearly wanted to object but nodded instead. As you wish, Mr. Chen, it's your home. Robert found Grace in the laundry room, folding tiny pajamas with a care that spoke of more than just doing a job. Grace, I have an unusual request, he began. Would you be willing to observe the twins' therapy session today? Just sit in and watch. She looked up, surprised. Sir? Please. I noticed something yesterday, and I just want a different perspective. After a moment's hesitation, Grace agreed. 20 minutes later, she sat quietly in a corner of the playroom while the therapist went through the usual exercises with Lily. Noah sat waiting for his turn, his expression already shutting down. Robert watched Grace's face, noting the slight frown that formed between her brows as the therapist tried to get Lily to stand by, holding her hands and pulling her up. She doesn't like that, Grace murmured almost to herself. Robert moved closer. What do you mean? Grace glanced up, embarrassed to be caught commenting. I'm sorry, it's not my place. No, please, Robert insisted. Tell me what you see. Grace hesitated, then spoke softly. Look at her face. She's not ready to stand that way. Her body is telling her it's not safe, and she's fighting it. The more you force her, the more she'll resist. The therapist overheard and gave them a pointed, look. Mr. Chen, perhaps your housekeeper could wait outside? It's distracting to have an audience. Robert ignored the suggestion. Grace, what would you do differently, if it were up to you? The therapist put her hands on her hips. Mr. Chen, with all due respect, I have a PhD in physical therapy with a specialization in pediatric development. I've been working with the twins for weeks now, following the protocol designed by Dr. Patterson, and they're still not walking, Robert said bluntly, not even trying to walk. He turned back to Grace. Please, I want to hear your thoughts. Grace looked uncomfortable being put on the spot but met his gaze steadily. I worked at Rainbow Children's Center for 15 years. I've seen hundreds of children learn to walk, each in their own time, in their own way. The key is finding what motivates them, what makes them want to move. And how do you do that? Robert asked. You create an environment where movement becomes natural, where they forget they're afraid because there's something they want more than they fear falling, Grace replied. She looked at Lily, who was now sitting on the floor, refusing to cooperate. With the therapist. For instance, Lily loves books, I've noticed that. But instead of bringing the books to her, what if we created a situation where she wanted to get to the books? The therapist scoffed. We can't just wait around hoping she'll suddenly decide to crawl to a book. Actually, Grace said gently, that's exactly what children have been doing for thousands of years, learning to move because there's something they want to reach. Robert felt something shift inside him, a recognition of simple truth amid all the complex theories and expensive treatments. Let's try it, he said suddenly. Mr. Chen, the therapist protested, this is highly unorthodox. So is paying a fortune for treatments that don't work, Robert replied. He turned to Grace. Show us, please. Hesitantly, Grace approached Lily, kneeling down to the little girl's level. Hi, sweetie, she said softly. I hear you like books, is that right? Lily looked at her with wide eyes, then nodded slightly. I have a special book right over here, Grace continued, pulling a colorful picture book from the nearby shelf. She opened it, showing Lily the bright illustrations. Look at that, it's a puppy. Do you like puppies? Lily's face lit up. She reached toward the book. Instead of giving it to her, Grace placed the open book on the floor about 3 feet away. The puppy is right here waiting for you. The therapist started to object, but Robert held up a hand, silencing her. Lily looked from the book to Grace, confusion and desire warring on her tiny face. You can get to it, Grace encouraged. Take your time. No hurry, no worry. For a few moments, nothing happened. Lily just stared at the book, clearly wanting it but uncertain how to proceed. Then, slowly, she leaned forward, placing her hands on the floor. "That's it," Grace said softly. "Feel the floor with your hands. It's holding you up, nice and strong." Lily rocked back and forth slightly, then, to everyone's amazement, began to army crawl toward the book, her eyes fixed on the colorful pages. Robert felt his throat tighten. In all the therapy sessions, with all the specialized equipment and expert techniques, he had never seen Lily move with such determination. When she reached the book, Lily let out a delighted squeal, patting the pages with her small hand. Grace smiled. "Look at you. You did it all by yourself." The therapist stood with her mouth slightly open. "That's the most intentional movement I've seen from her." Noah, watching from his corner, began to scoot toward them, clearly interested in what was happening. "And look," Grace said quietly to Robert, "now her brother wants to join in too. That's how children learn from each other, through play when they're relaxed and having fun." Robert stared at Grace, seeing her, really seeing her for the first time. Not just as an employee, but as someone with wisdom born of experience, with an understanding of children that went beyond degrees and protocols. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. "About your background, your experience?" Grace met his gaze steadily. "You hired a housekeeper, Mr. Chen, not a child development specialist. It wasn't my place to offer opinions on the children's care. Even when you could see they were struggling, that nothing was working." "Especially then," she replied softly. "People in my position learn early on that most employers don't want our input, no matter how well-intentioned." The honesty of her response hit Robert like a physical blow. How many other voices had he silenced without realizing it? How many potential solutions had he overlooked because they didn't come packaged with impressive credentials and hefty price tags? As if reading his thoughts, Grace added, "Sometimes the answers we're looking for are closer than we think. They're just in places we don't think to look." The twins were now both examining the book, their small bodies positioned in ways that strengthened their muscles and improved their balance, achieving naturally what weeks of therapy had failed to accomplish. The therapist cleared her throat. "I should point out that this is just one session. It doesn't mean—" "It means we need to rethink our approach," Robert interrupted. He looked at Grace with newfound respect. "And I think we have some more talking to do." In that moment, watching his children engage with their environment in a way he hadn't seen before, Robert felt something he hadn't experienced in a very long time. Hope. Not the desperate, grasping hope that had driven him to seek out specialists across the globe, but a quieter, more grounded hope that perhaps the solution had been right here all along, in the gentle hands and quiet wisdom of a woman he had barely noticed until yesterday. The next morning, Robert canceled all his meetings. Again, the board could wait, his children couldn't. He called the nanny into his office first thing. "I'd like to make some changes to the twins' daily schedule," he told her, watching her face carefully. "Of course, Mr. Chen," she replied, her professional mask firmly in place. "Would you like me to coordinate with the new specialist from Switzerland? His office has been calling to confirm next week's appointment." Robert shook his head. "No, I want to pause all specialist appointments for now." The nanny's eyes widened slightly. "All of them?" But Dr. Patterson was very clear about maintaining the therapy schedule. "I'm aware," Robert said, "but I've been thinking about what we've been doing, and I'm not convinced it's working for Lily and Noah. I'd like to try something different." The young woman shifted uncomfortably. "May I ask what approach you'd like to take instead?" "I want Grace to work with the twins for a few hours each day." "Grace?" The nanny couldn't hide her surprise. "The housekeeper?" Robert nodded, noticing the flash of judgment that crossed her face. "Grace has extensive experience with child development. She worked at Rainbow Children's Center for 15 years before coming here." "I see," the nanny said, though her tone suggested she didn't see it all. "And what would you like me to do during these sessions?" "You're welcome to observe. In fact, I think it would be helpful if you did. We might all learn something." Robert softened his tone. "This isn't a reflection on your work. The twins adore you. But I think we need to try a new direction. After the nanny left, Robert called Grace in. She entered cautiously, as if expecting to be reprimanded. "Please sit down," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. Grace perched on the edge of the seat, hands folded in her lap. "Is everything all right, Mr. Chen?" "I've been thinking about yesterday," Robert began. "About what you showed us with Lily and the book. I want to talk to you about your background at Rainbow Children's Center." Grace's posture relaxed slightly. "It was a wonderful place. We worked with children of all abilities, from mild developmental delays to more significant challenges. I started as a custodian, but the director, Dr. Rivera, saw how I interacted with the children and encouraged me to take classes in childhood development." "And you earned a degree?" She nodded. "It took me 7 years of night classes while raising my own children, but yes, I have a bachelor's in early childhood education with a focus on developmental challenges." Robert leaned forward. "Why didn't you mention this when you applied for this position?" "The agency sent me for a housekeeping job," Grace explained simply. "My degree wasn't relevant to cleaning your home. And honestly, Mr. Chen, at my age, and with the economy as it is, I was grateful for steady work with good pay." Robert felt a twinge of shame. How many other talents and abilities had he overlooked in the people who worked for him? How often had he made assumptions based on someone's job title rather than seeing the whole person? "I'd like to try something," he said. "I've asked the nanny to pause the twins' therapy schedule. Instead, I'd like you to work with them for a few hours each day using the approach you demonstrated yesterday." Grace's eyes widened. "Mr. Chen, I'll double your salary, of course," he added quickly, "and hire additional housekeeping staff to take over your current duties, but only if you're willing. I understand it's not what you were hired for." Grace was quiet for a moment, considering. "The twins are wonderful children," she finally said. "I would be happy to work with them, but I need to be honest with you, there are no quick fixes. What you saw yesterday was a beginning, not a solution. Every child develops at their own pace." "I understand," Robert said, though the businessman in him still wanted timelines and guarantees. "But I saw something yesterday that all the specialists missed. I saw my children engaged, not afraid. I want to see where that can lead." That afternoon, Grace began her new role. The nanny watched from the doorway, arms crossed, as Grace transformed the playroom into what she called a movement invitation space. "Children need to feel safe to explore," Grace explained to Robert as she rearranged furniture. "But they also need interesting challenges that make them want to move." She created low platforms with cushions, placed favorite toys just out of easy reach, and set up a simple obstacle course with pillows and soft blocks. The room looked nothing like the clinical therapy space it had been. "Now we wait and watch," she told Robert. "Let them discover on their own terms." When the twins were brought in, they looked around with obvious curiosity. The room they knew had been transformed. Noah spotted his favorite truck on a low-cushioned platform and immediately began scooting toward it. "See how he's using his arms to pull himself?" Grace said quietly to Robert. "He's building upper body strength that will help him stand later." Lily was more cautious, surveying the room from her seated position. Grace had placed several books in different spots, including one on a very low stool. She seized the book. Grace whispered, "Watch what happens." For several minutes, Lily just looked at the book, seeming to consider her options. Then slowly, she began to move toward it, using a combination of scooting and crawling. When she reached the stool, she placed her hands on it and pulled herself up to a kneeling position to reach the book. Robert's breath caught. He had never seen Lily pull herself up voluntarily before. Grace smiled but didn't rush over to praise her. "We don't want to make a big deal of it," she explained to Robert. "If we get too excited, she'll realize she's doing something special and might become self-conscious. We want movement to feel natural, not like a performance." Over the next 2 hours, Robert watched in amazement as his children explored the room, gradually challenging themselves more and more. There were moments of frustration, of course, and times when they needed help, but overall, they showed more initiative than he had seen in months of formal therapy. "They're actually enjoying This, he marveled. That's the key, Grace replied, learning through joy, not pressure. The nanny, who had been watching skeptically, gradually moved into the room. I've never seen them so active, she admitted. Would you like to join us? Grace invited. The more people they have to interact with, the more motivation they have to move. By the end of the session, both twins were visibly tired but content. There had been no tears, no meltdowns, no resistance, just exploration and play that happened to build exactly the skills they needed. Same time tomorrow? Grace asked as Robert helped gather the twins for their nap. Absolutely, he replied. That evening, Robert called Alicia. When she answered, he could hear the wariness in her voice, expecting another argument about specialists or treatments. Something's different, he said without preamble. With the twins. I want you to come see. What do you mean, different? Alicia asked cautiously. They're moving more. Exploring more. Lily pulled herself up to a kneeling position today, all on her own. There was a pause. What specialist did this? Not a specialist, Robert admitted. Grace. The housekeeper? Robert, what are you talking about? He explained what had happened over the past 2 days, how Grace's approach had awakened something in the twins that all the experts had failed to reach. I don't understand, Alicia said when he finished. You're saying our housekeeper knows more than the specialists we've been paying thousands of dollars to consult? I'm saying she knows our children in a way the specialists don't, Robert replied. She sees them as children, not cases, and they respond to that. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I'll be home tomorrow, Alicia finally said. I want to see this for myself. The next morning, Alicia arrived just as Grace was setting up the playroom for the day's session. Robert watched his wife's face as she took in the transformed space, so different from the clinical environment they had maintained for months. What is all this? She asked, gesturing to the cushions and toys strategically placed around the room. It's a movement invitation, Grace explained, looking slightly nervous to be addressing Mrs. Chen directly. Each setup encourages a different kind of movement. Reaching, crawling, pulling up, balancing. Alicia's expression was skeptical. And this is better than the equipment the physical therapist uses? It's not about better or worse, Grace said gently. It's about finding what works for your specific children. The clinical approach wasn't connecting with Lily and Noah. They were resisting it. This approach lets them lead the way. Show me, Alicia said, her tone making it more command than request. When the twins were brought in, they immediately began exploring, clearly already comfortable with this new routine. Noah scooted to a low platform where Grace had placed building blocks, and to everyone's surprise, he pulled himself up to a standing position while holding onto the edge. Alicia gasped. He's standing. He's motivated by the blocks, Grace explained. He wants them enough to overcome his fear of standing. As they watched, Lily made her way to a cushion where a stuffed animal sat. She too pulled herself up, wobbling but determined. They're both standing, Alicia whispered, tears filling her eyes. I haven't seen them do that willingly before. Robert moved to stand beside his wife. It's been like this for 2 days now. Small steps but real progress. No tears. No fighting the process. Alicia looked from the twins to Grace, her expression a mix of gratitude and confusion. How did you know to do this when none of the specialists figured it out? Grace smiled gently. Sometimes, when you're too focused on the destination, you miss the journey. Your children weren't refusing to walk. They were waiting until they felt safe and ready to try. All we did was create an environment that made trying feel worth the risk. As they watched the twins continue to explore, Robert felt Alicia's hand slip into his. It was a small gesture, but one they hadn't shared in months. In that moment, something shifted between them, a shared hope replacing the blame and frustration that had driven them apart. I think, Alicia said softly, we all have some learning to do. Looking at his wife, his children, and the quiet woman who had brought this transformation into their lives, Robert couldn't have agreed more. 6 months passed in what felt like the blink of an eye, The Chen household had transformed from a tense, clinical environment into a home filled with laughter and movement. The twins, now 2 years old, not only walked but ran through the hallways, their footsteps and giggles echoing off the walls that had once felt so silent and sterile. Robert stood in the doorway of the playroom, watching as Noah carefully stacked blocks into a tower taller than himself. The boy's concentration was intense, his little tongue poking out between his lips as he placed each block with deliberate care. Across the room, Lily read a picture book to her stuffed animals, turning pages and babbling in her own language, occasionally looking up to make sure her audience was paying attention. "I still can't believe it sometimes," Alicia said softly, coming to stand beside her husband. "Remember where we were 6 months ago?" Robert nodded, reaching for her hand. Their relationship had healed alongside their children's development, the shared joy of watching the twins progress bringing them back together in a way that counseling had never managed to do. "Grace is here," Maria called from the kitchen. Though Grace no longer worked as their housekeeper, she had become the twins' developmental guide and a central figure in their lives. Robert had insisted on creating an official position for her, with a salary that reflected her expertise rather than her previous role. Grace entered the playroom with her usual calm presence, a canvas bag filled with new activities slung over her shoulder. The twins spotted her immediately and ran to her, Noah wrapping himself around her legs while Lily bounced up and down with excitement. "Good morning, my busy bees," Grace said, kneeling down to their level. "What adventures shall we have today?" Robert and Alicia exchanged smiles. The change in their children still felt miraculous, though Grace always insisted it was simply the natural outcome of letting children develop at their own pace in a supportive environment. "We have something to discuss with you," Robert said once the twins were engaged with the puzzle Grace had brought. "Can you join us for coffee after you get them settled?" 20 minutes later, the 3 adults sat in the kitchen while Maria served coffee and pastries. Grace looked between Robert and Alicia curiously. "Is everything all right?" she asked. "The twins are doing wonderfully. Noah's balance has improved so much and Lily's confidence grows every day." "Everything is more than all right," Alicia assured her. "That's actually what we want to talk to you about." Robert leaned forward. "Grace, the work you've done with our children is remarkable. You've changed not just their lives, but ours as well." Grace shook her head modestly. "I only showed them what they could already do. The twins had everything they needed inside them. They just needed the right environment to bring it out. And that's exactly why we want to talk to you about our idea," Robert continued. "We want to create that environment for other children too." He slid a folder across the table. Inside were architectural plans for a building along with a business proposal. "We want to open a developmental center," Alicia explained, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. "A place where children with various challenges can receive the kind of support that helped Lily and Noah. And we want you to be its director." Grace's eyes widened as she flipped through the plans. "This is extensive. We've purchased the old community center building on Pine Street," Robert explained. "It has enough space for multiple play areas, offices, meeting rooms, and even an outdoor playground. We'll renovate it completely, design it specifically for this purpose. The approach would be based entirely on your methods," Alicia added. "Child-led, development through play, creating environments that invite movement and exploration." Grace looked up from the plans, clearly overwhelmed. "This is incredibly generous, but I'm not sure I'm qualified to direct an entire center. I have experience working with children, yes, but running an organization is different. You'll have all the administrative support you need," Robert assured her. "Financial management, HR, marketing. We'll handle all of that. What we need is your vision, your understanding of children, your approach. That can't be found in a business degree." Grace ran her fingers over the plans thoughtfully. "And this would be available to any child who needs it, not just those whose families can afford expensive therapy?" "Absolutely," Alicia said firmly. "We're establishing a foundation to fund it. No family will be turned away based on their ability to pay." For several moments, Grace was quiet, taking it all in. When she looked up, there were tears in her eyes. When I lost my job at Rainbow, after 15 years because of budget cuts, I thought that chapter of my life was over. I never imagined something like this. So you'll do it? Robert asked. Grace nodded slowly. Yes. Yes, I would be honored. The next few months were a whirlwind of activity. Robert threw himself into the project with the same intensity he brought to his business ventures, overseeing renovations, handling permits, and setting up the foundation's financial structure. Alicia, who had returned to work part-time, focused on community outreach, connecting with local pediatricians, schools, and family support organizations to spread the word about the center. Grace dove into curriculum development, designing spaces and activities based on her years of experience. She also began assembling a team, interviewing potential staff members with Robert and Alicia's support. What about this applicant? Robert asked one evening, reviewing resumes at the dining room table after the twins were in bed. PhD in physical therapy, impressive research background. Grace studied the resume. Her credentials are excellent, but I'd want to see how she interacts with children before making a decision. Some of the most qualified people on paper don't have the patience or flexibility needed for this approach. Alicia nodded in agreement. That's what was missing from all the specialists we hired for the twins. They had the knowledge, but not the connection. As the opening day approached, Robert found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. One afternoon, he visited the center alone to see the nearly completed renovations. The main play area was a wonderland of thoughtfully designed spaces, climbing structures at various heights, tunnels, stepping stones, and cozy corners for quiet activities. Every element had been created to invite movement and exploration while accommodating different abilities and comfort levels. Standing in the middle of the room, Robert remembered the sterile therapy sessions the twins had endured, the frustration and tears that had been a daily part of their lives. How had he not seen what was missing? How had all those experts missed what Grace had understood instinctively? It's beautiful, isn't it? Grace's voice came from behind him. She often came to the center after finishing with the twins for the day, adding finishing touches and preparing for the opening. It's perfect, Robert agreed. I just keep thinking about all the children who will benefit from this place. Grace smiled, looking around the room. You know, when I first came to work for your family, I never imagined this would be the outcome. I just saw two children who needed a different approach than what they were getting. Why didn't you speak up sooner? Robert asked, a question that had lingered in his mind for months. You must have seen immediately that the therapy wasn't working for them. Grace considered her answer carefully. When you're in a position like mine, a housekeeper, someone in the background, you learn to stay in your place. Most people don't want suggestions from their cleaning staff, especially about something as personal as their children. Her words hit Robert with unexpected force. How many voices had been silenced because he hadn't thought to listen? How many solutions and insights had he missed because he only valued input from certain types of people? I'm sorry, he said quietly. I never meant to make you feel that way. You didn't, Grace assured him. It's just how the world often works. But you did something many people wouldn't. You noticed, you asked questions, and most importantly, you listened when I finally spoke. That's rarer than you might think. On the day of the center's grand opening, families began arriving an hour before the scheduled time. Word had spread through the community and the response had been overwhelming. Parents of children with various developmental challenges came with hope in their eyes, many having tried traditional therapies without success. The Chen family greeted everyone at the door, Robert, Alicia, and the twins, who were now confident toddlers eager to show other children their favorite play areas. Grace stood nearby, welcoming each family with warmth and answering questions about the center's approach. A local news crew arrived to cover the opening, having heard about the billionaire tech mogul who had founded a developmental center inspired by his own children's journey. Mr. Chen, the reporter asked, what inspired you to create this center? It's quite different from your other business ventures. Robert glanced at Grace, who was helping a hesitant child explore a climbing structure, and at his own children, who moved with a confidence that once seemed impossible. I learned something important through my family's experience, he replied. Sometimes the most valuable wisdom comes from unexpected sources. I had surrounded myself with experts who saw only the problem, when what my children needed was someone who saw their potential. And the center's unique approach, the reporter prompted, is entirely based on the insights of Grace Wilson, our director, Robert said, gesturing toward Grace. She taught me that development isn't something you can force or schedule. Each child has their own timeline and needs to feel secure and playful to want to explore their capabilities. Later that afternoon, as families continued to explore the center, Robert found Alicia watching a young child taking his first tentative steps between two cushioned platforms, his mother's eyes filling with tears of joy. "We're going to change so many lives here," Alicia said softly as Robert put his arm around her shoulders. "Grace already changed ours," he replied. "We're just passing it forward." Across the room, Lily and Noah were showing another child how to build a tower with oversized blocks. They moved with ease and confidence, their earlier struggles now just a memory. Watching them, Robert felt a profound gratitude, not just for their progress but for the journey that had brought them all here. The journey had taught him that sometimes the most valuable things in life, wisdom, understanding, and compassion, couldn't be bought with any amount of money. Sometimes they came in the form of a quiet woman who had been right in front of him all along, patiently waiting for him to see what she could see, the unlimited potential in every child, including his own.